You can't hear.
Right.
Can you hear now? We don't know. What do we hear? I can hear now, says someone. Good. Well, I'll start again. How much will they have heard so far?
No.
Nothing. Right. We'll start at the beginning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And since we're transmitting from Texas A&M, howdy, which is what you'd expect to hear from Texas. I'm Bernard Lane. I have worked with rural communities since 1964, working on development issues generally, and increasingly with questions of rural tourism. Rural tourism is not a silver bullet for the problems of rural areas, but it's a valuable point to start to reassess the resources you have in an area and to consider the importance of diversifying your economy and improving your economy. Now you'll see on your screens that I have a sort of hybrid life. I edit the Journal of Sustainable Tourism, a major research journal on a worldwide basis. I work for Red Kite Environment, who consultancies into nature tourism, rural development, heritage tourism, heritage management, and so on. And we begin with a piece of poetry from one of our most known and loved poets, William Wordsworth, who was a nature poet who realized the value of getting into nature as increasing numbers of people were moving into the 19th century cities. He says, therefore, I am a lover of the meadows and the woods and the mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth. He began to realize that for the soul and also for the body, nature outdoors was very important. And most of his poetry was written about the English Lake District. Here, in the heart of the English Lake District, Wastwater, Wasdale, Cumbria, a Korean professor of agricultural economics savours the view. Well, okay, nature tourism has been a long time in the making. Why did it grow? Well, there is this question of romanticism. The view that nature, getting into the countryside, gives pleasure, it becomes a psychological healer, exercise gives health. This all leads to what you call recreation, what some people will call recreation, and a sense of happiness. Increasingly, getting into nature has become part of the whole idea of healthy living. You know that we now live longer and we don't wish to die, so you have to live healthily. Nature is a place to take physical exercise. You do this through walking, through climbing mountains, through running, through cycling, and much more. It's also become an increasingly fashionable place to go. This has always been, for the rich, the case. In much of Europe, people had their country seats where they went in the summer to hunt and shoot and fish. But now, for the masses, it's a fashionable place to go. This feeling you need to have some sort of place, if only for a couple of nights in the countryside. Escape like a monk, live like a prince. The whole issue of escapism in society is very important. In tourism generally, especially important for nature tourism. And in the last 20 years, nature tourism has become much easier for people to partake of because transport has become much easier, much more accessible through cars, through interstates, taking you to long-distance nature venues. You can phone up and book your accommodation and inquire, or you can go onto the internet for almost anywhere in the world to check out conditions and so on. On the other side of the coin, on the supply side of the coin, there is this great need to diversify the rural economy. from being a monoculture of agriculture, being a broader picture that tourism employment and tourism businesses bring. There's the need to retain and support rural services, which you can best do by creating demand. And visitors demand transport services, retail services, health services, and so on, and support those rural services. There's the need to justify the conservation of rural heritage, whether it's natural, built, or cultural. Users help justify, you would call tax dollars, what we would call public sector money, supporting that heritage. Heritage very well displayed in most rural areas because change has been slow. And in the last few years, we've seen the logic of local tourism growing in a world of climate change. Instead of going to a distant resort, why not go, in your case, to a Texan rural area and enjoy nature and reduce your carbon footprint from travel by travelling locally. And we should also remember, we now know, after 20 years of intensive research and practice in nature tourism, we know how to do it. We forget that 20 years ago we frankly didn't. We know how to manage it, and we know how to link agriculture and tourism together. And running sort of concurrently with these changes, we have to remember two important things. The rise of the new woman, the woman who is capable and keen to develop a small business, the woman who is skilled through education, the woman who has often moved into a rural area because she's teamed up with a partner in that rural area and brings urban skills and the knowledge of the urban market into the rural area. Women are key factors in the rise of rural tourism. They don't just function in the hospitality section, they bring in a wealth of knowledge about the market. Going with that is another new type of person, the lifestyle entrepreneur. I met one yesterday in a small town called Calvert. He happened to be an Englishman, but that's irrelevant. A person who had made money and wanted to open a high-class restaurant on his own terms in a historic building, and chose Calvert to do it. Lifestyle entrepreneurs want a rural lifestyle, and they have the money often from previous activities to create very interesting nature tourism facilities. They actually want to live and work in that sort of area. Okay, well, I know that from the list in front of me, some of you are academics and you need to define what we're doing. What is this thing, nature tourism? The answer is lots of different things. Fundamentally, it's observing and experiencing nature. But it also, in many cases, includes farm tourism, because to live on a farm is a way of living close to, stay on a farm is a way of living close to nature. It often encompasses the culture and heritage of rural areas. In some cases, a narrower definition of ecotourism can be used. Ecotourism implies that there is not just looking at nature, but also a feedback into rural communities of support and a feedback into conservation. There's the whole growing business of activity tourism, often of challenge tourism. I've noticed that around College Station, nature tourists tend to come on bicycles, travelling at great speed over many hours through the countryside. Frantic activity tourism. And then there's the Texas definition. The Texas Nature Tourism Council is a very wide definition. It includes backpacking, caving, hunting, scenic driving, cycling, wood ranches, living history experiences, beachcombing, bird watching, fishing, native plant tours, stargazing, geological tours, swimming, and scuba diving. Well, that's a very broad, I dare say so, very Texan view of life, all-embracing, we'll call it. Is it wise to be so all-embracing? Well, very briefly, yes and no. The nature tourism market is a complex one. They're not simply people interested in nature. It's multifaceted. There are people who are interested in nature, but are also interested in looking at farming, looking at historic buildings, in tracking down and enjoying meeting rural people. The nature tourism of Council of Texas realizes there are many product opportunities. They're often very site-specific. No one site has everything. It also reflects the reality of the travel unit. Typically, people travel either as a couple or in groups of people, friends or colleagues. And typically, the travel unit has somebody who is perhaps very keen to watch birds. The wife or the friends may not be keen to watch birds. They want to do something else. So you can provide everybody. The only problem I can raise with the Texan definition is that it needs to determine how you conserve that unique selling point, the rural world. How you look after that rural world that is your seed corn of nature tourism. And it needs to consider a brand image of the countryside in Texas or anywhere else where this goes on, and think about it. From my point, I would say that for me, sustainable rural tourism is first of all market aware. It's aware of the market and what it wants. It's holistic in its approach. It seeks to keep alive small towns and farms, as well as just tourism establishments. It's long term. It looks towards sustainable long-term development. And it uses tourism as a tool to justify conservation of all things rural. So, pictorially, for a brief moment, we'll look at the pictures. It includes walking, climbing, peacefulness, simply relaxing in a natural environment, perhaps watching those birds seen here on the Scottish lawn. And it's also a family pursuit, a family ramble with the baby strapped to your front through pleasant land, not too strenuous, great views or sounds from the birds. It includes looking. Here are Thai people watching fruit bats set off on their nightly quest for food. It includes farm animals, perhaps heritage farm animals, as in this case, and inevitably it includes food, because those farm animals end up here in a well-presented piece of food. In this case, actually, this is cheap meat, part of a modern nouvelle cuisine presentation of famous Scottish haggis. And small town, Australian small town in this case. Small town is very much part of the rural scene. Well, how do we make it work for you? And two sides to this. How do we make it work for a region, for an area, as a community? And secondly, we look at later as what do you do as an individual business making it work? Start with a broader picture then. The Magnificent Seven, we could call this slide, not just the Big Seven. I must change it. You need 7 things to make nature tourism go. Number 1, I can never stress too much, you must know the market or markets that you are providing for or working with. Unless you do, you can create the wrong product. Secondly, you have to create products. Yes, nature is there, but you have to enable that to become a product, things for people to do and experience. I'll explain this when I've done this introductory slide. You have to provide what I've foolishly called here sleep facilities, accommodation. Because when people stay the night, it cuts their carbon transport footprint. It also begins to build the whole idea of destination. You have to market your product. Something rural people are not used to doing, particularly if they've been in the farming market when you simply sell to a buyer who does the marketing for you. You've got to organise the creation of market understanding, product development, sleep, and so on. You have to train people. Tourism is a complex business that needs training. And certainly in the early years, you need support for people to make the transition into a different sort of economy. To start saying a little bit about understanding markets, the first thing you have to know is, how far will people travel? Now, I don't know how far Americans travel. You will know better than I do. In Europe, we know that typically people will drive most 1 hour, perhaps something really good, 1.5 hours in a day to travel to their site. That tells you that you must concentrate your marketing in European terms within that travel area. What's the competition? Where do people go at the moment? That usually means that you have to know people in that 1.5 hour travel zone, in the European case, and find out where else can they go. Is there somebody offering the same thing? You have to then think, what can I offer for that market? What do they think about the area I'm working in, or the area, the community I'm trying to help? The image of an area is very important. You can best do that by recruiting your local university to do a little bit of student research for you, to build up that feature, to design your marketing materials around what people think of your area. You have to keep on learning more. Once the business starts, always a good idea to have a little 5-question note on your visitors so you can know more about them. Who can help you learn? Well, I think Miles Phillips is the man you need to talk to, sitting on my left here. Assuming you're beginning to know a little bit about your market, you then have to create product. Countryside everywhere has hidden and authentic product. You have to bring it to life through your marketing activities and by offering access to it. You can't stay on a fast road to get into the countryside. You have to offer access through footpaths. In Europe, we're great walkers. I don't see so many walkers here because distances are big. Through cycleways, through scenic byways, which you're very strong on, and occasionally through heritage transport, an attraction in itself, whether it's a heritage bus or very occasional in this part of America, railway train, or whatever it is. As I started in Eastern Europe, heritage car hire. I know you have rent-a-wreck, but I suppose it could be so. And then you have to interpret, explain to people what are they looking at. Because most city people just don't know why things are important, why they're interested. Eventually, interpretation, your explanation, actually becomes a product, especially if it's delivered by a local person. Research tells us that what people love is hands-on experiences, whether it's, as I often joke, managing to hold a sheep, very rare business, very difficult to hold a sheep, they run away. Watch milking cows, watch, hear birds, wild birds, especially big ones, because some people love birds, and also to meet people. Hands-on people that just enjoy conversing with local people. One of the things I find in a lot of rural areas is this need to get local people to recognise and celebrate what they take for granted. They don't realise. Again, going back to Calvert, driving through suburban Calvert, this terrific mix of great trees, lush grass, splendid early 20th century local buildings. They see it every day. Visitors impressed. Okay, back to Europe. For 4 years, I worked on a project in Romania. This is a picture in the Gheață Crăule National Park in central Romania. And I use this to illustrate this is a beautiful picture, yes, but it's much more. the opportunity to develop product here is very important. This area cannot be reached by asphalt road. You have to go up a rough track, and then you enter this splendid highland area with lots of local buildings which are interesting to look at, and you need to, if possible, stay the night in one of these buildings, an experience in itself. You need to be able to eat the local products, the apples, the plums, the apricots that this area produces. You need to be able to travel just a bit further down here, go into a high seat and observe black bears and wolves. And you need to know how to get into the high seat, where it is. You need to be able to take the footpaths that run through here. And so the locals had to learn to map their footpaths and put in the arrows to assure people that they would not get lost. And so bringing this whole area to life is a task for product development. What about accommodation? Well, that's a product in itself. It's a great use for spare buildings that you might have if you're on a farm, or spare rooms if you're living in another house. The great thing about accommodation is it makes money while you sleep. There are not many jobs that you can make money while you sleep. It brings a lot of family earning possibilities to earn money without having to commute over a long distance, to travel over a long distance. And it comes in many different forms, from camping to simple bunkhouses, to self-serviced accommodation, through to rural inns, and in some cases to special build accommodation, which you can ask me about later if you want to know more about that. By getting people to stay the night, it cuts their travel emissions, it keeps them there longer, it increases their spend, it builds a destination. This is the simplest built form, the so-called stone tents, which are popular in many parts of the UK. Simply an old hay barn with provisions into, well, you have a choice of male or female, or you can take it for a whole family. You can bring your own cooker, basically out of the wind and the rain, and you have mattresses provided. You bring your own stuff. Or, sorry to go the wrong way, you move up into the 17th century inn. Can't quite manage 17th century inns in Texas, but I'm sure you can get to 19th century inns with all ensuite accommodation, serving good meals, acting as a pub. You can even now get married at the Bower House Inn. For the people who are bored by the marriage ceremony, you'll notice, if you can look on your screen, it has big screen sports action. Where are you going? Marketing. Everybody thinks that's easy. It's actually very difficult. The first thing to tell you is it needs to be targeted. If you're in a birding area, that's great, because there are bird watcher magazines that they buy and read while sitting on their toilets for months and years afterwards. Targeting your market to what you offer best, using all sorts of ways of doing it. Remember, marketing begins with signposts. If they can't find your place, if you can't find your area, if they don't know you're in area because you've not signed it up in an area. But very basic signposts. Nowadays, you must have web presence, because outsiders are now increasingly used to using the web. Over 50% of UK tourism bookings are now done on the web. That often means that you can have your own site, or you can work with the community site. It needs quite simple skills, keeping their names and addresses and their email addresses, sending them, your visitors, Christmas cards and announcements and new activities. It often needs to work together as a group for best effect. You also need to get organised. Basically, your competition, the big resorts, are very organised. So you need organisation as well. You typically need to work in a group, because it saves you money, it gives you support when you don't know what to do, and it gives you access to lots of European situations as a group, you get access to grant money, but you can't get it on an individual basis. That means you've got to find someone at least to chair your group, if not to lead it. You need a broker, a person to sort out the disagreements amongst group members. And you need an advisor if you get into difficulties. And again, Miles Phillips is the person to ask about that. And you need to get organisation both at single enterprise level and at area levels to operate, lobby, market its network. One of the best pieces of advice for single enterprises I ever heard was when working in Germany. The advisor advised this group that at all times you have to have a pad next to the telephone with at least 2 pencils or ballpoint pens, because you can guarantee one will dry up on you. You have to have a script that your son, daughter, if you're a woman, your husband, operates to when there's a business inquiry. Simple as that. Training. Well, part of the training is to learn all about those things we've talked about. And I say on my screen, can you build a car? The answer is most people can't. Why do they think that you can operate in tourism without any training? Just because you went on a holiday once. It is a complex business. It needs skills. It needs skills regularly, update. And it needs support. Individual enterprises need support because it's a lonely business running a single enterprise. That's why the group meeting is quite valuable, to discuss what you do when yet another tourist smokes in bed and burns a hole in your sheet. Developing nature tourism is a big task. It needs political support, recognition from your local political representative. You need at least an annual training day. You need an organisation to fall back on, and you need all that infrastructure of signposts, of information centres to fall back on. That leads you to the whole idea of local forums, of associations, partnerships between stakeholders, getting public sector support, and having friends, if nothing else. Okay, what about individuals? I'm regularly asked to go to a farm or some heritage site. Decided they want to get into tourism. The first question you have to ask them, you have to observe, are they good with people? Tourism requires you to be good with people. Nothing wrong with people who are not good with people, but don't go into tourism. Because people will drive you quietly mad if you're not good with people. Secondly, have you done your homework? Have you looked at a similar business somewhere else? Have you realised what is required? Very basic homework. Do you have funds to carry you through the inevitably lean first or second season until you get established? Does your partner and family agree with this idea of tourism? Do they realise if you're going to run a bed and breakfast that they'll see people they don't know while they are in their pyjamas? You've also learned to separate family areas from visitor areas, but you've got to get used to this idea and agree with it. Have you drawn up a business plan that's based on realities? Have you looked at somebody else's business plan and see what happened to theirs? Can you work with other people in a local partnership? And can you work Saturdays, Sundays, long hours, and multitask? All those are things you have to know. It's those things, a tough world out there. You have to remember that you're not selling goods. You're not selling a pint of milk or I was about to say a kilo, a pound of apples. Selling experiences, and it's a very broad experience. People come to enjoy experiences. You're in fierce competition. They can go to other nature tourism destinations, they can go to totally different destinations. It's a job where you're not just even selling experiences, you have a duty of stewardship to conserve nature, keep it alive. And you're working in a strange way in the fashion business. Tourism is a fashionable business. It's where you go depends on fashion. And you're selling not just experiences, you're selling dreams to people who work in an office in front of a screen all day. You're selling the dreams of escape out of that office, or making dream days come true. Finally, do not be afraid to copy good ideas. I very rarely have a good idea myself. Because I travel the world, I get bright ideas which I squirrel away in the back of my mind and bring out, try to use somewhere else. Don't be afraid to look at the competition and learn from them. And keep up in touch with the new ideas that are arriving on scene. There's local food towns, which 10 years ago we didn't know about. Now they're growing across the world. Book towns, very strange phenomena that some people love to spend their days browsing through books. There are huge quantities of second-hand books available, cheap to buy. Many small towns have very cheap accommodation. You can set up bookshops and become book towns. If you Google Hay-on-Wye, Y spelled W-Y-E, that is the king of book towns, with nearly 30 bookshops, second-hand bookshops with associated clothing shops and quality restaurants. Came from nothing, from an almost dead town to being a thriving business. Period towns, celebrating, themed on a period, heritage regions, cycle trails, events. People love going to events. A series of events is how their life is built on a whole series of events. And remember, understand this whole question of interpretation. It is a US invention, so that's good to see. Never stand still, because tourism is an exciting business. Okay, I have had my allotted 30 minutes. Over to you now. Ask me as many questions as you like, of any kind, for as long as you like. Miles is working away. And is this the first question? Can I comment on the English and European perception of Texas as a destination? Oh dear, difficult question. I'll start with the most difficult bit. Most Europeans know that Texas is the home of the Bush family, and that brings a political issue straight into the question. For many Europeans, they have a vision of Republican politics. Having said that, let's forget that for now. They know above all else that Texas is big. And beyond that point, many Europeans know nothing more than that Texas is big. They don't realize that it has a Spanish heritage, Spanish-speaking heritage. They don't realize that it has a wealth of nature. They don't realize that it has fascinating and very readable country towns that are totally different. Once you understand them, just as interesting as European towns. And they don't realize that Continental Airways is based in Houston, and so there are lots of flights that you can get into Houston if you're coming out of Europe. So Texas is, for many Europeans, an unknown destination, and each one is theirs to explore. One last point. The roads of Europe are clogged with vehicles. The roads of rural Texas are marvelously empty. A lot of people just love driving in a place like rural Texas because it's so relaxing. Once they understand the four-way junction problem, they can relax.
You can go ahead and prompt them to text in a question.
Just sending you a prompt to send in your question. Otherwise, I'll have to make them up. Could I comment on paying for ads online? And I'm not quite sure what that means, but
Buying advertisements online instead of in print.
oh, I see. Yeah. Now, this is an interesting one for me. Most Europeans wouldn't do that. They don't buy ads online because they're not that sophisticated. What most of our small towns do is or small rural areas do is they love to have a piece of print because it's tangible. And the great thing about the piece of print is they have to learn it's not a totally descriptive. It has to sell what they're good at and explain what series of experiences you get. And once you've got a piece of print, it goes by every bedside in any accommodations that you have. Bedside browser concept, giving them ideas of what to do, encouraging them to come back or stay longer. So we would start with a piece of print. Our next port of call will be to get that piece of print into local tourist information. And our next port of call would be to use press and local television and radio media to get to your hour and a half hinterland for local visits by inviting your press or TV person out, showing them around so they write a good piece. The key thing that comes out of that is the requirement for an area website or an individual website. You see, we're very mean in Europe. We don't like to pay for ads online. We actually don't know how to do it very easily, and we like to have the direct contact through the web.
I'll just tell them.
Just the next question's coming in. This idea of staying in contact with your visitors by occasional email, by sending them Christmas greetings along with the latest piece of print, which has been made light enough, the right size to get through the post, is a one that particularly alpine areas in Europe use. I hope everybody's still out there. What do you think the special physical component in tourist spots towns should have, such as infrastructure? And you raise the exciting question of the visitor centre. Well, let's start with a very basic visitor centre, which is not a building you can go into. It is simply a board which tells you what you can do, where you can stay, where you can go to get things to eat, when with telephone numbers. It's not a visitor centre that requires very much money. It's one that is easy to put up. It caters for the passerby. In many parts of Europe and also in Australia, you will get the idea of a specialised building for a visitor centre. That's a great idea, but you have to remember it requires normally a cost to purchase and to convert. It requires a cost to administrate, and it's only worth doing if you can either get some form of foundation government grant to set it up, and if you can get volunteers to staff it. Trained volunteers are a great resource. I'll come back to them in a moment. Remember, visitor centres every 8 to 10 years will need renewing to get their displays up to scratch and so on. What I typically use is a deal with a post office or a shop to run a visitor centre within that place, or I would use, in some cases, a church or in summer, a school that is not in business as a school, trying to get the multi-purpose centre rather than a centre purely dedicated to visitors. If you've got a lot of visitors, though, the visitor centre is something to think about. Physical components that you can also look at is the whole signposting question from central area to various places, and the idea of having a tourist trail which you can follow. Remember, we're great walkers, so a European will happily walk 5 miles in an afternoon. Perhaps an American would not be so happy about that, but you can have shorter walks, circular walks that bring you back to the place you started. And you can then either run key point interpretation system on that walk, either by having boards along the road or by having a leaflet with information on the leaflet to carry with you, or if you're very sophisticated, you can have what we call a wand, an audio wand, which you rent, and a voice speaks to you as you go along, as you pass the specific points. So physical components in tourist towns, all there. One critical physical component could, of course, also be accessible toilets. So I mentioned while I was talking about that, and thank you, the questions I can see on my screen are now flowing in, keep going, the importance of volunteers. As people live longer and retire early, in some cases, you have a group of people who benefit socially and particularly mentally from being volunteers. Like to meet people, keeps them busy and active and interested, and looking after volunteers is a great skill. I know that there are institutes for learning about volunteerism in the US, and the whole point about visitors is it allows widows, volunteers for visitors, it allows widows to meet widowers and widowers to meet widows and so on. There are all sorts of things there. But they do need training, they do need advice in how to talk to lots of people, find out what they're interested in, give them good advice. So volunteering is something that churches can help you with, many other people. I'm going to ask the question here, how do we best gain community support for nature tourism? It's a very good question, because many communities don't know what nature tourism is. They often fear visitors who may bring in crime sometimes, they think that comes in with visitors. So you need, again, to work with your local press and media to explain what nature tourism is, how it will not turn their town into Las Vegas. It will be very low impact. Its management techniques are available to distribute your visitors. That you can control marketing so you don't get the wrong type of visitors who are unhappy there. And you have to point out the great benefits of bringing dollars into your town, supporting your shops and your food and beverage organizations and businesses, and also recognizing your town or your area as a place to go, putting it on the map, boosting, in some cases, real estate values as it goes along. So you work with your media, you work by providing supportive information, and whenever you do something new, you make sure that gets local coverage in the media, you celebrate it and support. You also stay in contact with your what we call councillors and members of parliament, with your elected representatives here, and make sure that they recognise what's going on and they keep the official organisations tuned to what's going on and ready to help. Next question says, how would you deal with the chicken and egg question of getting appropriate accommodation? Should that come after you have developed a marketed product? Well, terribly good question, that one. Some accommodation can be a form of product. Particularly boutique bed and breakfasts are worth visiting for many people, regardless almost of where they are, because to experience particularly a heritage B&B is worth a trip in itself. But in some cases, accommodations can actually come first, and product can be developed around it. In the ideal situation, you try to get totally synchronized, that you would begin to develop and market products, and accommodation will then grow as more visitors come looking for accommodation. So it's a very tricky question to get right. You'll never get it perfectly right. But if you have a small amount of accommodation available, it will spur the whole idea of visiting your area, because if you get there late, you can't stay and this sort of thing. What we often find is that many people consider setting up local accommodation. They don't know how to do it. So if you can get a day course to explain how it works, if you can get eventually what we call an accommodation circle in many countries, meet each other, support, bring new people into the accommodation provision, that helps the process along. It also, of course, depends where you're situated. If you're very close to a large town, you don't need to hurry with your accommodation. They can always stay in the large town and come out. But if you're a distance out, and a lot of places in Texas are distance out, accommodation is important. Incidentally, over many rural areas, accommodation is not intensively used. And a lot of local people like that. They don't want to be busy every night. They like to get a bed night occupancy rate of about 30% of the potential bed nights available. Because it allows them to continue to have a normal life and still brings in enough cash to make it worthwhile. Now, Keith Schmidt says, I have some property, the historic trail from the 1840s when German immigrants came to Texas, and I can see from your name, Herr Schmidt, that Sie kommen vielleicht aus Deutschland und kann vielleicht Deutsch sprechen. So that's something I've learnt through many trips to the USA, that the German component is very important in this country. You'd like to rebuild, make it a public hike and bike, but I'm not getting much support from the local county commissioner. This is not a problem unique to Texas, to the USA. It's common across the world. Remember, people working for the public sector, my screen is faded away. Oh, good, it's come back. Plenty to do, and they often worry about getting a new job to cover their time. Is there someone or some group at a higher level in the Texas government to get support for obtaining permits? I can't answer that. I might hand over to Miles for that. But what I would say is that it's a question of making your local county commissioner or commissioners feel good. Remember, they're human too. If it's no good shouting at them, that'll turn them off. You've got to invite them out, make them realize that you're a serious person with a great product to sell, that it could get them good coverage in their local newspaper. It could get them a handshake from the elected representative. You're not dangerous, you're not just some form of freak, got this idea, but you really know what you're talking about. And if they get a good meal and they come out to see you, they'll be on your side. Now, I'm just going to pass over to Miles. Is there something you need to answer?
I can tell them contact me.
Oh, to get information on permits, funding, and legal support, whether you need to transfer your property from private to public and how you can do that, contact Miles Phillips, who is moving to the other side of the room. Oh, he's just started something. I thought you must have his email, I'm sure. If you don't, if you telephone Texas A&M, I'm sure they'll give you that. Okay. Farmer called Tazim Jamal has just called in and says, what advice can you give to nature tourism operators, small ranchers? You mean ranchers with a reduced acreage. And farmers operating nature, for example, regarding common pitfalls and problems to watch out for. Right. Well, particularly if you're operating a ranch or a farm, you have to know that most urban people don't realize that this is not a hotel, this is your property. And you have to have areas where you make it quite clear that this is private. It's sometimes dangerous on a farm. Go into all areas of the farm. They may come up against something they can fall into, machinery operating, animals that they don't understand, and so on. So, first of all, you have to know how to handle people, make them feel welcome, and explain that it's not a good idea to smoke where there is hay, and all obvious things people sometimes forget. You've got to know that this is an area where some people will be afraid of farm animals. That's particularly true if you get Asian tourists. I worked at one stage in New Zealand where we had a lot of Japanese tourists who had never physically handled cattle, sheep, or even large dogs. And you also have to know that they're often afraid of walking in rural areas. Not just Asians, many Americans not used to this idea. And they're worried about getting lost. So if you have a farm walk, for example, you sign it well so they cannot get lost. I would be fairly certain that in the US you'd have to have some form of insurance. Again, Miles Phillips will be the expert on that. So they're common problems to watch out for. You also have to know that you should, if you're away, leave a message on your telephone, quite simple things, so that anybody can leave a message. You can ring them back if they haven't, if you're not in, to get them their business later. Rhonda Cummins has said, Keith, I can put you in touch with Miles, so that's good. Someone asked, can you comment on the marketability of rare versus locally common nature and wildlife experiences? Can common nature and wildlife be a valued attraction? Well, the answer is yes, it can, because remember, children, families with children, are new to nature tourism. They need to introduce their children to quite common wildlife experiences, nature experiences, and if you have, for example, interpretive information, remember, you can layer it. That means you can have information for children, information for families with children, information for the experts. And particularly close to town, the whole idea of picking your own food crops is a very valuable nature tourism experience for children. One of the great successes I had in Japan was introducing the cut your own rice concept. Most Japanese urban people have never been in a rice field, never learnt how to use special knives to cut their own rice. Great success. So You could link that then to the whole idea of actually physically coming in contact with small farm animals and watching. I don't think you have sheep here, but where we live, we have sheep shearing activities, watching the production of sheep cheese and so on go on, or in also opening up places with suitable hygiene precautions for cow's milk activities and so on.
We can close down if no more questions.
Yeah, we will. Any more questions? Because I'm still here. Gone terribly silent. The other thing to tell you, of course, if you're a small farmer, is the whole idea of direct sales to the public, cutting out the middleman, which if you get visitors to use your farm trail, you can sell them food directly and eventually build up a relationship that you can either deliver food to them or they can come out regularly to collect it. And you can get a lot of information, sorts of things that they like to buy, can't obtain locally. Any more questions? There's still a number of you online, I can see. Okay, if you have a question after it's all over, you can always email me, and that'll be forwarded via Texas A&M, via Miles Phillips, and you can always forward it to me, and I will send you an answer once I manage to cross the volcanic ash that's separating the USA and Europe. So, thank you very much for listening.
Take this and